Okay, we are recording. So today we are so happy to have Mr. Thomas Ling here to speak to us about his career in finance. Um, and we greatly, as I mentioned, we greatly appreciate you taking the time, the energy, being willing to speak to our students today and sharing your professional experience and any advice you may have for them. So without further ado, I present to you Mr. Ling.
Thank you, Beth, and thanks for having me. Excited to talk to you guys about finance today. Quick thank you to, I'll keep them anonymous, but one of your classmates has an interest in finance and invited me to come speak with you guys today. So without further ado, I guess I'll start with a brief intro. I work for John Hancock Life Insurance in the real estate side, where I'm a managing director of the multifamily investment space. Which is a fancy way of saying, I manage the big apartment buildings that you would see that we own across the country. So, just a quick philosophical note, my thoughts on careers is really that you should be kind of doing something good for society and get paid in return. Right? That's the whole point of jobs, in my opinion. And I start off with that because finance sometimes gets skewed a little bit. And I will say that finance is one of those jobs where, there's probably a spectrum when it comes to careers. There are some careers where you do a lot of good to society and you don't get paid what you're worth. Teachers is probably one of those that comes to mind. And there's other, ends of the spectrum where you're doing, good for society, but you maybe get paid a lot more. Frankly, finance is probably one of those careers. But you can find different ways to do good and get paid. And so when you think about finance, maybe some of you guys, I don't know if any of you guys or girls have been following, GameStop or Bitcoin or whatever else, but investing for yourself and, basically gambling. I know you guys might have heard of his YouTube name is Warren Kitty. I can't say his Reddit name on here. But basically this guy made about 30 something million dollars for himself by trading GameStop over the course of less than a year. And really most of it happened within a month or two. And so he, did he do good for society? Maybe in some way he exposed certain inefficiencies in the market and helped some people who followed him for a long time earn money. But that's not what I mean by do good for society, because I don't think that was his intent. He wanted to make money for himself, which isn't a bad thing. It's just not, necessarily a career. And so the way I think about what finance is it's the science of money. It's a science of kind of making money. And really it all boils down to one thing, which is that money loses value over time. And so as finance people, especially investment people, what we're trying to do is make sure we stay on top of that inflation that kind of destroys the value of your money, plus earn a little bit more. And I'm going to get into that in more detail. But, just to break down finance into a few different segments, one big division that I make, and anybody who is an accountant will probably want my head for saying this, but I divide finance and accounting in half. And I look at accounting as kind of looking backwards and finding the right jar to put the bean in, right? So they call them bean counters for a reason. And so basically when you spend money, when you earn money, how you allocate that, but it is extremely important to be able to follow the rules and to be able to properly record all of your accounting. And then, tax policies will come into play and you can help a company a lot. And frankly, you can make a lot of money as an accountant. But the finance side, in my opinion, is a little more exciting. It is kind of forward-looking. You help, again, try to grow money for a company, manage their money. And if it's not for growing money directly through an investment, it might be, call it investing in a capital expenditure where you're buying a piece of machinery where you're hoping that it's going to help with your production for making widgets or whatever your company does. In turn, you hope that will help you make money. So that's not a direct finance, application, but it is still part of corporate finance that you'll see a lot. So there are a few different ways to look at finance. So I just mentioned corporate finance there. There's personal finance. You can help people, whether it's just retail investors who want to figure out how to get out of their debt problems and whether they can afford to buy a certain car. Or you could, they call themselves wealth managers. It's a fancy way of being a financial planner, but maybe you're more geared towards the high net worth and ultra high net worth people. But these wealth managers and financial planners help individuals mainly get to their retirement goals and stay out of trouble. And then you can also work for the government as well too, and help allocate money that way. But just a little bit of background, like why, I work for an insurance company as I started off with. And so what exactly does that have to do with finance? And I will tell you, I actually am a finance person with absolutely no idea how insurance works. I do not understand the product. The one thing that I do understand about insurance is that you sell policies and you hold on to people's money, and then 70 years later, somebody dies and you have to pay them money, right? So you're holding on to that money for a very long time for a lot of people. And so rather than letting inflation eat away at how much money you have, companies like John Hancock and my previous employer, which was Prudential in here in New Jersey, we decided that we were going to go manage that money and put it into different things. So there's stocks and bonds, as most people are familiar with, but there's also alternative assets. And one of those alternative asset groups, and one of the biggest ones, is real estate, where we'll buy buildings, get cash flow, hope and try to manage them towards gaining value, and then we will sell them later on in the future, and that helps grow your capital. So we started doing that for balance sheets, and then we started realizing, wait, we have this talented team. Why don't we manage for other people as well? And so when you think about your teachers, for example, they typically invest from their paychecks into pension funds. And so these pension funds, back in the day, it was more kind of what they called defined benefit rather than defined contribution. So back in the day, they used to say, depending on how many years you worked and how much you made, when you retire, you're going to be able to feel comfortable making this much money for the years after retirement, which was great, except for the fact that every time there was a financial crisis, the pension fund would lose money and not be able to actually meet the obligations of the retirement. And so they started switching over to defined contribution, which basically just says, here, you have some money, figure it out. We'll help you with certain products, but you're more left on your own. But there's still a lot of defined benefit money today. And so part of what we manage a lot as an insurance company is a pool of defined benefit contributed pension funds, as well as foundations, nonprofit money, endowments, like basically for schools. If you go to college and you wonder, where does all this scholarship money come from? Usually these universities take alumni donations. They have a big pool of $1 billion or maybe more, and they try to invest it and try to grow it. And they don't want to use that principal to pay for scholarship. They want to use what they earn to pay for the scholarship, so they can continue growing and paying for future access to education. So our role as institutional money managers is to help grow these pension funds, these foundations, these endowments. So in some way, I think that is a good way to define our social contribution from the corporate side. I think the other part is, especially for what we do, not so much maybe stocks and bonds, but we also aggregate and allocate capital, right? So when you think about real estate, a developer could come out one day and say, hey, I'm going to build 300 units of apartments in a big office building in the middle of Long Valley. And that might not be the best thing for Long Valley. The roads might not be perfectly designed for that type of volume. The school system might not be, it's not going to be good for property values there. But a town like Morristown might be able to accommodate that, right? And so, very simplified example, but just looking at two different investments, even if I'm not thinking about necessarily the social good and all of that stuff about it, I'm thinking about the financial return. Am I going to build 300 units in Morristown, or am I going to build 300 units in Long Valley? And I'll probably opt for Morristown and become a drag on their resources, which is absolutely fine. So that would be, one of the decisions that I think, helps, with that allocation helps to steer money to the right places and in turn do social good on the other side of the spectrum. So getting away from kind of investment and corporate finance, you have personal finance, right? So let's go back to the whole example of corporate, financial planners, financial advisors, and wealth advisors. And so these people will, again, if you have a lot of money, they will help you with their investments. But there's probably a little bit of a spectrum as to how good, certain advisors are. And really, when you think about the buckets of skill sets, where everything lies, right? So somebody who's a financial planner that usually is focused on helping people repair credit and trying to allocate their household expenses, they're probably not going to be people who went to school for investing in stocks and bonds as much as a wealth manager or a wealth advisor would be, or maybe a corporate investment manager. So to think about it, you just have to think about what your skill set is and whether, if you want a career in finance, what you think you might be able to contribute most to the industry. And so, I think one of the key things that you just need is a good basis in math. But there are people that get into the finance industry without necessarily a strong basis in math, at least not throughout school. And you don't need calculus, you don't need trigonometry, right? SOHCAHTOA has no place in figuring out how to grow money, but you would need to at least be able to follow the logic of math, putting things in buckets, kind of like an accountant does, but being able to say, going to invest a certain amount of money. Here is the type of return. Here's the risk I'm taking, and being able to analyze that risk that you're taking in order to get that return, and then finally come out with the best conclusion possible. And that's the reason finance people get paid, because they end up making hopefully good decisions for the clients. So that was about 15 minutes, which is really all I wanted to do in terms of me talking straight. Wanted to make sure you guys all had a chance to throw in some questions, because this is a very broad field. I could be, talking for hours if I really wanted to. But because it is such a broad and, to me, interesting field, I wanted to see if anybody had questions. And feel free to get off mute and ask them in person, because I'm not good with figuring out this chat thing. Any brave volunteers? Is anybody interested in finance? I mean, is anybody actually, thinking
I'm
about
Mr. Ling. Oh, sorry. I was wondering, before like COVID compared to now, like what did your week look like? And then like after COVID hit, like how like things changed in the industry for you?
Sure. Yeah. So that's a great question. And, I'll speak specifically to my job. And so working again in multifamily real estate investment, at first I think everybody panicked when it came to what COVID was going to, bring. Nobody knew what that was going to mean for real estate, or was everybody going to start losing their jobs and default on paying their rent? And in turn, are we going to start seeing our property values drop, inability to pay for the debt, basically the mortgage on our buildings? And so that became a big concern. And so the first thing we started focusing on was kind of, collecting money from our tenants, right? And how solvent our tenants were. So, before COVID, I would say our day-to-day, and there really is no day-to-day, but, from a yearly perspective, budget creation and being able to guide the way that these apartment buildings, spent money for marketing and tried to get people in the door, and, ability to continue to grow rents and stay occupied was the big, focus. And during COVID, we started looking a little more granularly into the tenants, but then also where good investments were versus bad. And what we started seeing was in urban corridors, like, in New York City, for example, people just wanted to get out. And anybody who might have somebody who's involved in residential real estate, or might have, say your parents looked for a house recently, have realized that the suburbs have gained a lot of value over the last year. And so we've seen that same thing happen in the apartment space as well too. And frankly, in the office space, We've seen a lot of people, again, tenants just try to get out of their leases and think about, moving into the suburbs. I think the interesting question is really what's going to happen in the future, which is after COVID's done, is there any sort of permanent change? And I think people in our industry are a little split. Some think that, there's just going to be a quick return to urbanization. People are going to be living in New York again, working there, living there. But some other people, and myself included, think that return is going to be a little bit slower. Because we've shown this was the biggest test case of work from home that we could possibly have imagined. People have shown an ability to work relatively well from home, effectively, and in turn, there might become what we call the hub and spoke model for offices, which is to have a bunch of little suburban outposts and maybe a little bit of a smaller office downtown in New York City. But that in turn helps people stay in the suburbs and have a smaller or a shorter commute to their jobs. So those are some of the things that, we've thought about.
Thank you.
Yep. Jonathan? I saw your hand get raised. Or was that William? Sorry.
Yeah, that was my hand. I was wondering about like the distinction between personal finance and then like corporate finance. Obviously,
Sure.
like you're managing an individual's money versus a corporation's money, but like the main differences, like in terms of the skills that are required to get into those fields, and then also kind of the difference in the work.
Yeah. So I think if you ask anybody who's in kind of my field, we'll say that our job is harder and requires more just overall analytical skill. Probably not true, but there's certain certifications that you want to think about. So if you're kind of investing for institutions or in corporate finance, there's a certification called the CFA, which is the Chartered Financial Analyst. That is known as probably the hardest, maybe second hardest professional test that exists. That would probably fall right behind actuarial science or the actuary test as probably being the hardest one. That's for insurance people who actually do hardcore insurance underwriting and modeling. So the CFA is a 3-part. You can do it at shortest. It takes 18 months. It can take years for a lot of people to get through all 3 parts. And so, that is kind of a badge of distinction for a lot of people. On the personal side, I think that, the analytical part definitely is important. You do need a little bit more, in my opinion, of a sales mentality. And so let's start at the kind of financial planning and maybe not the wealth management part so much. You're going to be out there hustling for clients, right? You have to get clients, and you can have a track record and you're going to build your track record, but there's a little bit of a chicken or the egg problem. And so you have to be able to solve that first. And once you're able to build that track record, you can get more people to come invest with you. But and in order for you to get paid, you literally have to build up a book of business that is significant enough to help you make a living. So there is a lot of sales involved with that type of industry. When you get into wealth management, it can be a little bit different because, one of my friends, I went to law school, and just a short history. I went to Carnegie Mellon undergrad for business, went to law school because I just didn't know what the heck I wanted to do with my life. So after 2.5 years, I decided to leave law school. Law school's 3 years. And start working in real estate, and didn't really know I was working in finance necessarily. But I knew I was in real estate, and for 2 years I was building real estate finance models without realizing what I was doing on Excel until somebody told me that I should be getting paid a lot more. So that's besides the point. But the going back to the fact that I went to law school, one of my best friends from law school ended up becoming an estate planner, and she helped. She moved to Texas, helped rich oil men, ultra high net worth, hundreds of millions / billions of dollars net worth, plan legal structures around their estates, and in turn made a lot of connections that way. Not necessarily through any sort of great, salesmanship. She probably wasn't a great salesperson, but she was a great lawyer, and decided to leave the legal profession and get into wealth management. So she joined UBS and now is with Chase to do wealth management, and basically helps all of these high-end people, or high net worth people who have a lot of money, need to plan around it. And now they're realizing not only do they get tax advice from her, but she's also passed her FINRA Series 66, 67, Series 6, Series 7, 65, and she can sell, anything to them. So now they trust her, and she's pretty darn successful. So that was kind of a different way of kind of getting into it. Let's see. I think I have a question from Miss McKinnon.
Hi. I just wanted to know, like, how would you juggle, like, every financial bill that you have, like, from college to a job to living?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a universal answer. I was so I went to Carnegie Mellon, which for undergrad was a pretty good business program, and I was lucky enough to have parents who told me to focus on work. We'll take care of some of your spending expenses. That is great, but I still got a job, on campus job. Doing telemarketing basically for alumni dollars, which was an interesting experience. And that's something I'm not cut out for. But that was my job for a few years while I was at school. It helped pay kind of spending money, but I didn't have to worry so much about the kind of just being able to pay for the tuition and everything. And so this is one of those things that I think is actually really important. I'm glad you raised that up. A lot of people have a tough time getting into finance because they just don't have enough time to focus on school, and they start getting bogged down with jobs and everything. And there is a big DEI component today, which is a diversity, equity, and inclusion program, kind of going on within the finance world, where it's a social equity focus, where we want to start looking at expanding who we hire. I think over the years, the tradition has been it's kind of very like predominantly male focused and predominantly white male focused. And so what we've started trying to do in hiring practices is realize that, hey, there are really smart people out there that might not have gone to an expensive 4-year school, in turn realize their benefit, their strengths outside of the school they went to or the scores they earn on standardized tests, and be able to hire a little bit more and diversely. And part of the benefit of that, and what's really forcing it too, this is the interesting about working in finance, it's actually the finance industry that will start forcing more industries to do this. And because we get to allocate who gets capital, right, or how much they get for that capital. And so you have groups that will lend to companies that are more diverse, and it's becoming more and more frequent every day now. So, we'll give grants to people who actually, or to groups that hire with more diversity. So I think that, is kind of an interesting thing. But in terms of juggling, I'm going to be quite honest. I also was not a great college student. And, in part of that, not really figuring out what I wanted to do, drove me to go to law school for all the wrong reasons, which was to kind of hang out and, figure out what I wanted to do for a few more years. That is not the way I would recommend for anybody to lead their undergrad and postgrad careers. I would think that, if you get to a 4-year school and, work hard there, try to figure out what it is that you actually enjoy during those 4 years. But if you can't, you know what? Finance is not a bad job to try to get into anyway and see if you like it, because it will apply to every single industry, across the board. So I don't know if I answered your question extremely well, but it was my sorry attempt. So
I think we'll probably take one more question. My apologies. And then
Sure.
certainly, if you don't mind, if students had questions after that, if they could always reach out to us, reach out to me, and I could, if okay with you, share your information or relay the question.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think Braden had his hand up.
I think so.
Yeah, I was just curious, like where you went to school and what type of schooling you did, but you kind of already answered that.
Yeah. So Carnegie Mellon is a school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania that is, pretty highly regarded when it comes to their engineering, computer science. and business programs. So, part of my choice of going there was because the business program was, relatively strong. Interestingly, it's also has a really strong drama program. And I forget the guy's name, but who's the guy? Alcide from True Blood. What was his name? Joe, whatever. He was a Magic Mike. Anyway, he went to school with me while I was there. So that was, kind of cool to know him. But yeah, we've had a strong drama department and, kind of really a diverse department, but really known for quantitative analysis, which helps a lot when you're trying to go for a finance job.
I will actually ask a quick question. What advice would you give students now, like for the summer, anything just to help them along with giving them some exposure to the career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you could definitely look for internships, and there are formal internship programs that, informal internship programs that exist out there for high school, rising seniors. Though there's not that many. The more formal programs start when you're in college. I think reading up on things and learning how to use Excel is going to be a stronger, maybe even a stronger way. Like I think I did a couple of like accounting internships when I was a kid, and I, asked my mom to beg her friends to just let me in the office so I could, learn how, work really worked, and learn how to use Excel a little bit. But a lot of it was self-taught as well. And the school that I went to also just made us learn how to use Excel really well. So that's kind of the one key thing that is ubiquitous amongst really everybody in finance, just knowing how to use Microsoft Excel extremely well.
I just had a real quick question. What was your minor?
Didn't minor. I had a concentration in entrepreneurship and corporate law, which was like an undergrad thing, which was kind of interesting, but ended up going to law school. And everything changed.
Yeah, thank you so very much. Again, thank you guys for taking the time out to join us today as well. If you have some additional questions, certainly let me know. I can relay them to Mr. Ling. And this was so informative. I really appreciate all of your time. Thank you once again for sharing it with us. And like I said, if you guys have any questions, please let me know, and we can definitely forward that on to Mr. Ling.
Sounds
All
great.
right.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Beth.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.